Okay, so I've had a little bit of technical difficulties. Something is happening with my little pad that I write on, so I won't be able to write today, which is unfortunate. So, yeah, okay. So this is what a chloroplast looks like. It it has these little stacks of these disc things in them. Each little disc is called a thylakoid. That's where the chlorophyll is. And then the whole stack of the thylakoids together is called a granum. Or if it's more than one, then it's called a grana. Um, then the rest of the chloroplast is filled with the fluid stuff, kind of like cytoplasm, and it's called stroma. And that's annoying because it's really close to stoma, but it's not the same thing. And both of them are dealing with plants. Really super annoying. So stroma is the fluid stuff in a chloroplast. Okay. So here is the picture that you have on your notes. And it's important to remember that photosynthesis happens in two parts, the light reactions and the light independent reactions, which are also sometimes called the Calvin cycle. So what's happening over here on the left side is the light reaction. The energy from the sun is going in here, and the chlorophyll is reacting to that. So all the electrons are getting excited and jiggling around, and when they're doing that, that's causing the water that's coming in to split up. And when the water splits, it spits out NO2, oxygen molecules. Okay? So also because of all these electrons flying around and the splitting of the water, what we have is all this stuff happening right here in the middle, which is basically just forming these two molecules, the ATP and the NADPH, which are storing energy. And those go over here to the Calvin cycle, and that energy gets used. So then once it's used up, the NADP plus and the ADP come back over here to get replenished, and then the light reactions gives the Calvin cycle the energy again, and then the two molecules leave, and then they go around and around and around. But the good thing about this class is that you just need to know that it's electrons and molecules moving around, and that it's providing energy for the Calvin cycle and getting refueled in the light reactions. Okay, so moving back just to start the whole thing over again, the sunlight is powering the light reactions, which is basically just splitting up the water and providing energy for the light independent reaction, which is happening in the stroma. And what happens here in the light independent reaction is the carbon dioxide comes in, and a bunch of those carbon dioxides, actually 6 of them, are used to step by step. It's 3 major steps, and it hooks together all the carbon dioxides to eventually make a hexagon out of carbons, which is our sugar, our glucose. Okay, so when you're writing the location of the light dependent, that's in the thylakoids. The location of the light independent is in the stroma. The reaction here in the light dependent is H2O, yields water, and the reaction for the light independent is CO2, yields glucose. Okay. All right. So cellular respiration. What I need you to do for this is a lot of details which you don't necessarily need to know the details too much. You just need to know the basic overall process. So you do need to know the name of these 3 steps. Cellular respiration happens in 3 steps: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, or sometimes called the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. Okay. So what happens? What I need you to do is just kind of watch this whole section and then just write a summary of what's happening the whole time. So after the glucose is made in photosynthesis, the glucose comes over next to the mitochondria, and glycolysis happens. Notice that glycolysis is outside of the mitochondria, so this is just happening in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, so this is glycolysis, You start off with glucose, which is 6 carbons, and glycolysis breaks down that glucose into 2 molecules that both have 3 carbons called pyruvic acid. Okay. And again, you don't need to know what pyruvic acid is, but you just might see it in a question or something. It's never going to ask you what is pyruvic acid, but you just see it as an answer choice. So that's what it is. So glycolysis is the first step, breaks down glucose into pyruvic acid, 2 of them. Then those pyruvic acids come inside of the mitochondria, and the citric acid starts. Okay, the Krebs cycle takes those pyruvic acids, adds some oxygen, and then we break it down. See, we're forming this NADH again, so another energy molecule, and here we're forming CO2 as well. And then we form this other 2 carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA, which goes over here and does something else. Okay, so in the Krebs cycle, we're taking those pyruvates, adding oxygen, and making some ATP, and we're also making CO2 and H2O. Okay. Then the following step is called the electron transport chain, and this is where most of the ATP gets made, as you see. You don't have to memorize these numbers, but you can tell that the electron transport chain makes the most of the ATP. So what happens is this NADH comes along. Oh, come back. Okay. And this is really similar to the way that the electrons are shuffling around in photosynthesis. And actually, this is not important. Okay. So anyway, this is a really complicated process that's happening back and forth across the membrane of the mitochondria. So if you like zoomed in right here, it would be happening back and forth. And what happens is all these little protein channels are doing active transport and pumping all these electrons and hydrogen ions, and they're going back and forth and back and forth. See, all these are pumping the hydrogens out, or up, I guess. And then what happens is you have a super high concentration of hydrogen ions up here at the top, and it's the craziest thing, but this, all of a sudden, the hydrogen ions go boom, and they all move down, and it turns this thing, it actually rotates this little special pump right here called ATP synthase, and it actually turns it like a motor, and then that's what ends up pumping out all the ATP. Okay, so it's pretty crazy, but let's break it down to what you actually need to know. Okay, bam, how about this? We start with glucose, which is 6 carbons. We do glycolysis, which breaks it down half and half, 3 and 3. Okay, and then the next step is the Krebs cycle, which is finally releasing some CO2. And then the next step is the electron transport chain, where all the energy is created and more CO2 is created too. Okay, so here are the main things that you need to write during your summary. What are the names of the 3 steps? Where are the 3 steps happening? And what happens when oxygen is involved? If we look back here, we see right here in glycolysis, there's no oxygen. All that's happening is you're just using a little energy to split that up. The oxygen comes in here inside of the mitochondria. So I need you to say, what does oxygen really do? Oxygen is used here in the electron transport chain as well. Okay? Dun, dun. So, for summary, and here are some equations to write down overall. So the equation for photosynthesis, we take water and carbon dioxide, and that yields glucose and oxygen. Cellular respiration is just the opposite. We take glucose and some oxygen, and we slowly break it down to form ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. The only difference is the ATP stuck in here, where we don't really have it here in the photosynthesis. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what ATP looks like and what it does. It looks like this. Okay, we call it ATP. It stands for adenosine triphosphate, which is a fun word to say. And it's pretty simple name. This molecule right here, the pentagon, and these other pentagons over here is adenosine. And then if you look very carefully, you see we have 1, 2, 3 phosphates. Okay. And so that's why it's called adenosine triphosphate. Now, ATP is the actual energy source in the cell, but ATP itself is not the energy. Still not the energy. The energy that we care about is right here in this bond. It's still technically chemical energy. Okay? And what happens when we finally release the energy is this. Ready? Watch. The last phosphate comes off and it gets replaced with an H. Okay, so we've broken that bond, and this is a very, very high energy bond right here. Bam. And now we've released the energy, and now we're left with adenosine diphosphate. 1, 2, because there's only 2 phosphates, we call it ADP. Okay, so what you need to write for this one is the difference between ATP and ADP and how that works, and the function of ATP, which is just the usable energy in the cell. That's a little weird. Okay. All right, cool. So that's the end of the first page. The second page is really for you to do by yourself, but I will help you here. You want to start with something that looks like this. Okay. It doesn't really matter what order you, I don't know, just write this down. And then on the arrows, you're going to follow the directions and write the words uses or used by or makes right on the arrows. And then as you read down the next step, here, we can look at it together. No, we can't. Okay, well, the next steps tell you what to do to add to the where would water go on this flow chart, where would glucose go on the flow chart, and solar energy and usable energy. Okay, so blah blah, finish this out, and that's due tomorrow. So cool. Goodbye forever.